30 years ago, Resident Evil 1 dropped in 1996, and started a franchise that would define a lot of people's childhoods. One of them was mine, but the real spark that led to the megalith of a franchise we see today was easily Resident Evil 2, released in 1998. Of the 3 Resident Evil games I played as a kid on my brother's consoles, it was Resident Evil 1 Remake on the GameCube that I actually kept and stuck with into adulthood. Resident Evils 2 and 3 for the PlayStation would be games that I played, but lost access to after my brother traded in his PlayStation 1, and I ended up getting rid of the discs. One went to a friend for free, the other was sold, couldn't really tell you which was which. I remained a fan into my adult years, but the older Resident Evil games would get phased out by those shiny new entries that are now genre-defining unto themselves. 2019 would offer me the chance to play the long-overdue Resident Evil 2 Remake, released to overwhelming fanfare. It's been 7 years since then, long enough to marinate, but only in 2026 did the classic version come to Steam. So now I can do a direct comparison video after having been reintroduced to the same game in 2 different formats. The classic version was a trip to play in the modern day, and feeling those memories come rushing back was crazy. So it's the one we'll start with.
Resident Evil 2.
The first thing I should say is that if you want to play this game on Steam, you're gonna have to commit. It doesn't translate very well to modern controls or sensibilities. That's just the reality of playing a game made in 1998 for the PlayStation 1. It does take some getting used to, and as a matter of fact, easy mode is my preferred difficulty. Back in the original Resident Evil, the nightmare was confined to a mansion, but the first thing you heard was that some crazy spooky stuff was happening down in Raccoon City. Fast forward 2 months to September of that same year, and Raccoon City has been completely overrun by the undead. The story follows 2 survivors of this zombie apocalypse, Leon S. Kennedy, rookie police officer, and none other than Claire Redfield, younger sister of Chris Redfield, the protagonist of the first game. Like Chris and Jill, their stories generally follow the same beats, but they meet different people and grab different items and tools along the way. It's crazy to think that at the time, Resident Evil 2 was considered a huge graphical leap over Resident Evil 1, which itself was praised for its graphics, but today looks like the things indie devs design when trying to look as decrepitly retro as possible. But those graphics, even if they would be embarrassing today, helped Resident Evil 2 tell its story. Blurry photos of live-action actors were replaced with 2D portraits, and there was a wider range of scenes that could be played out with the better animation techniques. There's also a much greater range of threats. In the first game, you weren't going to see anything but zombies and zombie dogs for a while, and when you finally met the hunters, it was a sign the game was kicking into a new gear. In Resident Evil 2, not only is the police station already overrun with zombies by the time you get there, but they're already mutating as well. One of your first encounters is with the now iconic series mainstay, the Licker. The T-virus Umbrella created is responsible, but the situation that led to the outbreak also unleashed an even greater threat, the G-virus. A monster stalking the sewers, only known as G, is searching for a little girl named Sherry. In Claire's story, you trek through the game trying to find her and keep her out of harm's way, while in Leon's story, you partner up with a spy named Ada who wants to dig into the secrets Sherry's parents were keeping while working at Umbrella. The sheer level of imagination when it comes to creating the monsters and locales in this game makes it clear why Resident Evil went on to become Capcom's flagship series. This is some sick-ass stuff. Does the game repeat a few beats from the original? Well, yes. The Raccoon City Police Department is ritzy as fuck, the better to dress it up with puzzles and death traps awkwardly similar to the mansion from the previous game. And you'll run around finding 3 keys, then dipping into the next area before coming back with the 4th, and then you go further underground until you come up on the secret lab that was hidden under the surface. You get the idea. This was where Resident Evil grew its storytelling chops. Leon falls for Ada despite his better instincts, and despite her seeming indifference, she falls for him too, and the two tragically get separated while navigating Umbrella's labs. Claire understands the fear any big sibling would have while trying to keep Sherry alive, and the worst part is that both campaigns owe their various traumas to this girl's parents. Both of them are Umbrella scientists, with Annette causing multiple problems for the heroes and William having already been consumed by his life's greatest project, the G-virus. Monstrosities far beyond the ones in the mansion are now stalking the streets and the various levels, looking to kill, eat, and do much worse. There's also the fact that the 2 campaigns intersect at different points depending on which one you're playing, a storytelling choice that would be brought back for Resident Evils 4 and 6. Leon A links to Claire B, and Claire A links to Leon B. This really wasn't necessary, as the campaigns aren't different enough to justify replaying the same game 4 fricking times, more on that later, but it is pretty cool to play one scenario and see how it creates cohesive setup with the one you've played before. It's even encouraged to think about future playthroughs with certain events. You can open a locker as Leon and find an inventory expansion and a machine gun, and you can take one, both, or neither. Whatever you do or don't leave will be there when playing as Claire, or won't. Is it a good game? It kinda depends on what your metric for that is. It's a good enough story, not a tale for the ages, but the plot works well enough. Mechanically, it's obviously aged well past its prime, and the tank controls are something to be relearned and in some cases tolerated, but an earnest player won't be deterred by them. As a horror game, well, that's a good question. Does Resident Evil 2 hold up as a terrifying horror game? Well, no?
Boo! No talking!
Oh, come on, don't look at me like that. Hear me out, okay? It was actually quite a surprise to play through this game again and realize I wasn't getting scared, and in fact, with the exception of the occasional jump scare, the game's kind of chill. I would go through and see something intended to be scary, and I'd be like, ooh, that's really good, really eerie, but I don't think I was truly scared at any one point. It's difficult to be scared of the zombies when they sound very normal and a little pathetic. They sound like I do when I have a stomachache. Or when I'm in bed and don't want to wake up in the morning. The zombie dogs aren't better, just more annoying, and even things like the G-spawn look conceptually scary, but not enough to really make me bug out. I can't even say that the game was exceptionally scary for its time, because you know what else also came out the same year this game did? The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, the very first 3D Zelda game, which is by no means a horror game. And believe me when I say, that game had moments far scarier than anything this game was packing, mostly just in passing. At least the zombies in Resident Evil 2 never shrieked like a woman being murdered and froze you in place. And don't even get me started on the dead hand, that thing is a nightmare brought to life. I'm not going to say the game doesn't have its moments, but there's an uncomfortable truth I think we need to face if we're going to be fans of the classics, and that's that horror was a genre that benefited a lot from the technological improvements of the early 2000s, as well as the cultural influences. Horror got better over the years. Not in the sense that horror wasn't ambitious and influential before the turn of the century, but because horror was given more tools it could use to be scarier and more effective overall. There's gonna be people that get mad at me for this, but we have to face facts here. This game isn't scary now, and it wasn't scary then. You were just 5 years old. That's okay. It doesn't have to be an insidious, dread-filled experience that still holds up today, or whatever the armchair analysts will tell you. It was a light puzzle game about a zombie apocalypse with an underlying conspiracy plot, and it wouldn't really unnerve any serious horror buffs. It's not that it wasn't a horror game, but anyone that sits here telling you it's one of the scariest games of all time is doing some seriously overzealous glazing. This is a characteristic of all the PlayStation 1 era games, of course. The incoming games like Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 Remake would start pushing the envelope and really selling Resident Evil as a video game horror bible, and games like Resident Evil 4 would take it to the next level. There's no age I'll ever reach where those regenerators don't give me nightmares. Resident Evil 2 is still inspired and an artistic, ambitious horror game within its own right regardless, but it wouldn't be until 2019 when the depths of terror it could instill will be fully realized. Resident Evil 2 in 2019 is a game that caters very much to the horror crowd of Resident Evil fans, who had long been feeling neglected in the modern era. If anything, it overachieves in that regard, in that it's easily among the ranks of the most terrifying Resident Evil games flat out. A lot of the same ethos behind the Resident Evil 1 remake would manifest in the remake of 2, just with an over-the-shoulder camera perspective instead of fixed camera angles. The atmosphere is much darker and eerier, the danger looking around every corner is emphasized much more strongly, and the sheer level of polish in the gory details is beautiful. The zombies, the monsters, the dilapidated look of the station, it's all extremely dedicated. Resident Evil 2 in 1998 worked well enough, but its ability to show off Raccoon City completely overcome and collapsing under the outbreak was limited. It was shown off a lot more in Resident Evil 3, but now with the remake you can get the full picture much better, even when you're not out on the chaotic streets. The power is off in most of the police stations, so you have to carefully navigate your way through by flashlight, and the city is constantly soaked in a heavy downpour, which both limits visibility and adds a certain tension when navigating the long hallways lined with windows. A lot of things are preserved, including almost the entire map of the police station down to the details, and some things are tweaked to appeal to those older fans. You're dreading the liquor from the moment you first enter the station, and knowing that it was coming, expecting it around every corner, but having to wait until you're nearly at the STARS office to see it is crazy tense. The redesign for the liquor itself is visceral and nightmarish, and it's not the only one. A lot of enemies have been given facelifts, to some really great effects. The G-Spawn stand out as some of the most ugly, alien-like designs in the franchise, but probably the best redesign is the Ivy. Back in the original game, the Plant 43 monsters were slow, unimposing, and kind of silly looking, not to mention easy to dispatch. Ivy zombies are essentially humanoid victims that the larger plant experiment captured and horribly mutated. They have a nasty one-hit kill, they make unsettling noises as they stalk you, they like to drop down on you from the ceiling, and you have to use fire to kill them or they won't stay down. This takes all the best lessons from the Molded and RE7 and makes for a really unnerving enemy. Mr. X is probably the most prominent and important of the redesigns, though. His actual look isn't too much different, besides his face being all melted and him wearing that stupid hat. It's his behavior in the remake that makes him a much, much greater threat. You weren't going to see that much of Mr. X in a playthrough of the original, where despite being present from the beginning of the game on a B-scenario run, you'd only encounter him in maybe 5 or 6 rooms total, and he was completely harmless beyond that up until his boss fight. In the remake, Mr. X has complete freedom of movement and can stalk you around the entire police station and several outside areas, which is a freaking nightmare for the player. The fact that you can hear his heavy footfalls stomping around even from entirely different parts of the station, and won't be able to tell where the noise is coming from in most cases, plays merry hell on your nerves. Him showing up when you were really hoping not to run smack into him is basically a canon event, and it makes sneaking around the police station much harder. It's entirely possible to end up trying to escape him in a hallway with lickers in it, where you can't run or the lickers will kill you, but you can't just walk or Mr. X will kill you. And that's assuming zombies don't get you first. Another change I would remark very positively on is that of Brian Irons, the murderous chief of Raccoon City's police force. In the original, Irons was smarmy and barely bothered to hide his psychotic behavior, which was campy to the point of being cheesy. But I won't say it wasn't scary, because it was also obvious Claire was sweating bullets trying to keep it cool and not give him reason to kill her. His evil was also pretty poorly hidden to the point of the federal police sending faxes to Chris about what an unstable shithead he was. In the remake, Irons comes much more out of left field, catching Claire off guard and behaving more like an aggressive middle-aged man with a violent streak would in real life, which makes him all the more terrifying. There's also a section where you have to play as Sherry after he kidnaps her, which is unreasonably unsettling. Not everything is perfect, of course. Some aspects of the original just couldn't be carried over in the present day. You know how if you tried to get into that one room in the police station, the zombies on the other side would actually come after you in the loading screen door opening animation? Sick stuff. The same area in Resident Evil 2's remake has that same door, and there are still zombies inside, but since there's no loading screens, there's no way to pull the rug out from under the player the same way. So they just settle for having the zombies bang on the door until busting through. Some would say that the loss of the fixed camera angles also serves as something of a downgrade, but I really wouldn't consider that a noteworthy loss unless you're a hardcore Resident Evil purist. You still have to go through areas not being able to see everything around you, except now you have control over where your camera points, so it feels like a simple feature of the game rather than an arbitrary restriction. What is a downgrade, and why I can't consider this a perfect remake worthy of completely overriding the original the way the RE1 remake did, is the gunplay controls. I went through this in prior videos, and I will probably reiterate it in every single video concerning this era of Resident Evil. The gunplay fucking sucks. I prefer to play both versions of Resident Evil 2 on easy mode, but for different reasons. In Classic 2, both directions you can go in when first tackling the police station are weighted massively against you. To the east, there's an utterly stupid amount of zombies filling the hall, and to the west, there's the inevitable licker that takes a lot of ammo to go down. Unless you're an expert player, there's no way to get through these areas without getting mauled, and trying to shoot your way through will deplete you of ammo completely before you're done. Unless you're playing on easy, which gives you a crap ton of handgun ammo to start out with so you can make it past these initial hurdles. This is kind of a serious black mark against the game, but we let it slide, because it was 1998, it was only the second game, and Capcom were still figuring things out. Comparatively, Resident Evil 2 in 2019 crosses some fandom-brained cultural poisoning with some absolutely fucked game design. You see, despite the landscape of survival horror and horror in general changing dramatically in the time since 1998, some preconceived notions about the genre had set in. Among them were the idea that the ideal survival horror emphasizes limited ammo to be carefully conserved, and not wasted. That is to say, not spent on every enemy. I mentioned in my Resident Evil 1 review that this idea is often exaggerated as it pertains to Resident Evil, and other people smarter than me have remarked that this idea is probably as much accidental as it was intentional. If you were 7 years old in the late 90s and playing these games, you probably weren't very good at managing ammo. This doesn't necessarily mean the game was squeezing you for ammo on purpose. But either way, Capcom was still in course-correcting mode and were trying very hard to please a certain subsection of fans, among whom this idea is very popular. So you will be squeezed for ammo, and wasting it by missing shots is utterly disastrous, since zombies, the basic enemy, are now tanky as fuck, and can take entire clips to the head just to get back up again. Compounding this is 2 more issues. The hitboxes can apparently distinguish between individual molecules, and the targeting reticle is intentionally misleading. In traditional and sensible game design, lining up a reticle over a target and pressing the fire button is supposed to result in a hit. From RE2 onward though, the reticle just represents a relatively wide area where a bullet can hit. The seeming incentive is to be slow and patient with shots and stand still, so that the reticle will shrink to a more accurate, but still not guaranteed size. But that isn't feasible when you're trying to put down enemies heading right for you. Zombies make this more difficult than it needs to be with the way their heads swing around after impact, and lickers are worse with the way they like to climb on walls. As a result, there's virtually no incentive to go for headshots that will miss 75% of the time and make you want to blow your brains out when body shots are easier and take about the same amount of ammo. This, as well as the subsequent games in the series, including Ethan's games and the other remakes, were very obviously designed with PC in mind, and not properly playtested on console. It's very easy to play this game and think you just suck, when in fact, if you play Resident Evils 4, 5, or 6, you'll be able to tell very quickly that it's just down to the gunplay in the newer games being atrocious. Hence playing on easy mode, which comes with aim assist, which is virtually necessary to play and not want to throw your controller at the wall. PC-only playtesting is also probably the reason why the game was not at all optimized for PlayStation 4, which I played on. This was an issue that arose with Resident Evil 7 2 years earlier and has remained consistent with the series since. The loading times are complete deal breakers. The fact this game won Game of the Year awards with loading times as long as they are is absolutely baffling and a sign that we've gone backwards. You spend an aggravating amount of time just waiting for the game to load on console. And it's for these reasons that I actually don't replay this game nearly as often as I otherwise would. I've thought about buying the game on Steam and downloading mods to mitigate some of these issues, but I keep putting it off, not to mention that feels like cheating. I'm a firm believer in that mods should be used purely for God-given homey purposes, and that using them to fix games makes developers think that they don't have to make a game right the first time. There's also other flaws, though none quite so severe as those. Player characters will spout shocked or aggressive lines while dealing with enemies, but for some reason these are randomly generated. This means that half the time Leon and Claire are saying something that makes no sense whatsoever for the situation, with the entirely wrong tone.
What the? You bastard.
You bastard! Hell is up with you?
God damn it. What the hell?
You assholes.
It's embarrassing to hear while playing and drags down an otherwise excellent atmosphere. It's a shame, because if you take away the control issues and some of the awkward stuff, this would be a nearly perfect remake. Claire and Leon are likable, Leon and Ada have real chemistry, and the nightmare that is Raccoon City has been brought fully to life. It elevates the original so high that you start seeing what people remember so fondly in the series. The Resident Evil 2 remake has led Capcom down a surprisingly long road and influenced pretty much everything that came after it, often in good ways, but also often in bad ways. More on that later, of course, but you do start to wonder if another big new era is coming soon. After all, we've been with the RE7 era for 10 years soon. That's about the same time the RE4 era lasted, and the RE1 era before it. This series usually gets 9 or 10 years between its entries before a new sweeping change comes along. So if it follows the pattern, something is on the horizon. I've still got a few more games to examine in between then and now though, so that's where I'll be ending off on this one. Thank you so much for watching, and please leave a like and a comment and consider subscribing. Have a great day.